June 20th, 2016, Penn Hills, Pennsylvania. The Allegheny County Office of Children, Youth, and Families ordered the Penn Hills Police Department to remove multiple children from the home of a woman named Patricia Fowler. The authorities soon realized that two of Patricia's children, 17-year-old twins Ivon and Inisha Fowler, are no longer in her custody, and an investigation reveals that they have not been seen for around 10 to 15 years. Patricia provides conflicting stories about what happened to the twins, but even though she faces legal trouble, there is no evidence to prove that she harmed them, and Ivon and Inisha are never found. After that, the trail went cold.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today we're exploring a very unusual case involving a pair of missing twins, the 2016 disappearances of Ivon and Inisha Fowler. That voice you just heard narrating our intro was Kim Fritz, the latest winner of our most recent Trail Went Cold listener voiceover contest, so thank you very much, Kim. This is a recurring monthly contest which we've been holding for nearly 6 years now, so if you'd like to enter and haven't already done so, I will be providing instructions near the end of this episode. Anyway, prior to entering this contest, I had actually met Kim on a couple of occasions at various podcasting events, and she has also worked as a researcher for one of my personal favorite true crime podcasts, The Fall Line. As you might know, when The Fall Line launched 6 years ago, they provided extensive coverage on the unsolved disappearances of Danette and Jeanette Millbrook, a pair of 15-year-old African-American twins who went missing together in March of 1990. So I suppose it's only appropriate that when Kim originally entered this contest, the case she suggested I cover was another disappearance involving a pair of African-American twins. At the time they were officially reported missing, Ivon and his twin sister Inisha should have been 17 years old, but the problem is that no one could confirm actually having seen them in over a decade. In fact, when this story started generating publicity, the only existing photograph of Ivon and Inisha, which could be circulated by law enforcement and the media, was from when they were infants. The whole situation came about when social services ordered police to remove multiple children from the home of the twins' mother, Patricia Fowler, only to discover that two of her children had inexplicably gone missing. Patricia would share a number of different stories about what happened to Ivon and Inisha, which included selling them to a woman, but none of them could be substantiated, and investigators came to believe that the twins were dead. There's been a lot of confusion pinning down the last time Ivon and Inisha were confirmed to be alive, and even if Patricia was responsible for their disappearances, there are a lot of unanswered questions about what actually happened. So fair warning, this is going to be one of the saddest missing persons cases we've ever covered, but it needs to be shared, because these poor children were lost to history for several years, and their story deserves some conclusive answers. Anyway, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast, which is currently available for download on several platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, including stickers and thank you cards, early access to episodes, and bonus content. So with all that out of the way, let us now explore the disappearance of the Fowler twins. Our story begins in 2016 in Penn Hills, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Pittsburgh located in Allegheny County. On June the 20th, the Penn Hills Police Department received an emergency protective custody order from the Allegheny County Office of Children, Youth, and Families, aka CYF, as they had been performing an investigation into a 47-year-old resident named Patricia Fowler, who went by the name Trish. Trish lived with her children at a residence on Bryant Street and was being investigated by CYF for medical neglect with 4 of her minor children. One of her sons suffered from muscular dystrophy and was in a wheelchair, another son had autism and was nonverbal, and 2 of her daughters had eye conditions which could eventually lead to blindness without proper treatment. According to CYF, these 4 children had missed around 6 dozen medical appointments over the past few years, so the Penn Hills PD were given a directive to remove them from Trish's home. After the police paid a visit to the residence and took custody of the children, the 2 boys were placed in a residential facility. Trish's oldest daughter, Aisha, was 25 years old and had a child of her own, so she agreed to take custody of her 2 younger sisters so they wouldn't have to be placed in foster care. While this was going on, CYF performed an investigation into Trish's background to determine if her 2 daughters would be returned to her once they received the proper medical treatment. However, they soon made a surprising discovery. Even though the Penn Hills PD had removed 4 minor children from Trish's residence, there were actually supposed to be 6 children living there. The 2 missing siblings who cannot be accounted for were 17-year-old Ivon Fowler and his twin sister Inisha Fowler, who were born 28 minutes apart on October the 23rd, 1998. When a CYF caseworker spoke to Trish about this, she initially said that the twins were being cared for by an aunt in North Carolina, but this aunt did not seem to be reachable. The police decided to formally question Trish, but while she still claimed that Ivon and Inisha were with an aunt, she was unable to keep her story straight about whether the aunt lived in North Carolina or South Carolina. Trish did provide one of the detectives with a phone number where this aunt could supposedly be reached, but when he called it, he wound up speaking to a man who had no idea what he was talking about and said he had the wrong number. When investigators started pressing Trish about the twins' whereabouts, she kept changing her story. She said that a family friend was watching over the twins and provided another phone number, but when police called this person, she claimed she had never seen Ivon or Inisha and did not even know that Trish had a set of twins. Whenever Trish got caught in a lie, she once again changed her story and kept sharing information which turned out to be a dead end. At one point, she provided an out-of-state address where the twins supposedly were living, which turned out to be a vacant storefront, and she even tried to say they were now residing in a city in Georgia, which did not even exist. Detectives would later say that whenever they questioned Trish, she always spoke in a flat, unemotional tone and showed very little concern about her missing children. As the authorities kept attempting to locate Ivon and Inisha, things got progressively stranger, as they had a difficult time finding anyone who could even confirm having seen the twins within the past 10 to 15 years. Throughout the course of her life, Trish had given birth to a total of 9 children with 2 different partners. Aside from her oldest daughter Aisha, Trish had 8 of her children, including Ivon and Inisha, with a man named Daytwan Lyons. Trish and Daytwan never officially married, and the relationship was described as a complicated one, as he divided his time between Trish and another woman, with whom he fathered 2 more children. Daytwan described himself as a bipolar alcoholic who made his living dealing drugs, and he also had an extensive criminal record and frequently spent time in and out of jail. In October of 2005, Daytwan got into a violent altercation at a bar with a man named Jonathan Smith and fatally shot him, which led to Daytwan being sent to prison after he pled guilty to third-degree murder. He was paroled after serving 10 years, but later got sent back to jail for parole violations and was still incarcerated at the time Ivon and Inisha were discovered to be missing. Daytwan was interviewed by investigators, and he claimed that during his time in prison, Tricia told him that the twins were now with an aunt in South Carolina. After Daytwan was released on parole, he said that he attempted to make contact with Ivon and Inisha, but Trish constantly came up with excuses to prevent this from happening. The Penn Hills PD and CYF did some backtracking to try and figure out the last time the twins were confirmed to be alive. According to CYF records, back in 2000, Trish and her children had been living at an apartment on Camp Avenue in Braddock, another borough of Pittsburgh. On November the 8th of that year, when Ivon was 2 years old, he wound up being scalded with second and third degree burns on over 40% of his body, including his face, arms, and hands. When questioned by CYF caseworkers, Trish claimed this had occurred while she was bathing Ivon and his older brother, Datwan. And yes, Datwan was named after his father, and since he's going to play an important role in the story, I'm now going to be referring to him as Datwan Jr. to avoid any confusion. Trish's story was that while she was bathing the children, she had to step out of the bathroom in order to answer a phone call, but while she was gone, Datwan Jr. climbed out of the tub and accidentally turned on the hot water for the shower spigot. The water wound up spraying Ivon and severely scalding him, though Trish did not actually call for an ambulance to seek medical treatment until the following day. Ivon wound up spending the next month in a hospital burn unit and the Children's Institute of Pittsburgh before he was discharged and sent home on December the 13th. After performing an investigation, CYF found no evidence of abuse and concluded that Ivon's burns were likely the result of an accident, so they never notified the police or filed a dependency petition for the child. Datwan Sr. would say that after Ivon was discharged from the hospital, he had vivid memories of seeing the boy covered in bandages and having scabs all over his body. Shortly thereafter, Trish and the kids relocated to another residence in Braddock, but Datwan Sr. had no recollection of seeing Ivon again after that. However, Datwan did remember attending a family cookout sometime during the summer of 2001 and was certain he saw Inisha there, but not Ivon. Investigators tried interviewing the twins' maternal and paternal grandparents in hopes of figuring out their whereabouts. Trish's father, Thomas Fowler, said that he only had vague memories of the twins, but acknowledged that since he had around 30 grandchildren in total, it was hard to keep track of them all. Since Trish's mother, Martha Fullenwider, suffered from a number of medical ailments, one detective said she was, quote-unquote, not believed to be physically capable of assisting authorities, though Datwan would express his belief that Martha knew exactly what happened to the twins. When asked about Trish during an interview, Martha stated, quote, I sure do want to know the truth, but if she don't want to tell it, that's up to her. I turn it over to God, so it's in God's hands, end quote. Datwan's mother, Charlene Miller, claimed that she always attempted to maintain contact with her grandchildren while Datwan was incarcerated, but whenever she tried to see Ivon and Inisha, Trish would always stonewall her and say that they were being watched by other relatives. At one point, Charlene said that she showed up on Trish's doorstep with presents for the twins, but Trish told her that they couldn't come out. Like Datwan, Charlene could not confirm having seen Ivon or Inisha since the early 2000s, and since Trish frequently moved her children to different residences and changed her phone number, it was difficult for Datwan's side of the family to stay in touch with them. Investigators performed a search of school registration records, but found nothing to indicate that Ivon or Inisha had ever enrolled in any schools in Pennsylvania or any other states. From 2001 until 2006, CYF caseworkers made at least 5 visits to Trish in order to check on her, mostly due to complaints over her other children not having attended school. A search of Trish's file would uncover a handwritten note from a caseworker who claimed that they paid Trish a visit on September the 11th, 2006. By this point, Trish and her children were living in a duplex at Miller Avenue in Rankin, a borough located just south of Pittsburgh, and according to the note, the caseworker apparently saw a pair of twins during the visit. The following month, a dependency hearing was held in Allegheny County Family Court, in which the caseworker testified that Ivon and Inisha, who would have been nearly 7 years old at this point, were now staying with relatives in North Carolina and attending school regularly. On the basis of this testimony, CYF filed a motion to close the twins' case 5 months later. The court granted this request, and CYF did not make any more contact with Trish until June of 2016. The account from the caseworker seemed to be the last confirmed sighting of Ivon and Inisha, which is why the official date of their disappearances was initially listed as September the 11th, 2006. However, when the caseworker was re-interviewed, they acknowledged that their handwritten note in Trish's file may have been mistaken. Even though the caseworker did recall seeing a pair of twins during that time period, they may not have actually been Ivon and Inisha. The caseworker did not believe they saw any scars on the male twin, even though the scalding incident from 2000 should have left Ivon with scarring on over 40% of his body. Indeed, when Trish filled out a housing application to move into the duplex in Rankin, she was required to list all of her children as prospective tenants, but Ivon and Inisha's names were not on the original application. Investigators also spoke to a pair of landlords who each had Trish as a tenant at their rental properties between 2006 and 2015, and neither of them recalled seeing a pair of twins during the entire time Trish was living there. The wife of one of these landlords even confirmed that she frequently interacted with Trish's children and knew them all by name, but maintained that she never met a pair of twins named Ivon and Inisha. There was no indication that either of the children had ever been reported missing, as they were not listed in the databases of any organizations such as the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, aka the NCMEC. Law enforcement wanted to launch a new missing persons investigation, but when they searched Trish's possessions, the only photo they could find for Ivon or Inisha was an older black and white picture which had been taken of the twins together when they were still infants. As a result, the NCMEC was asked to create age-enhanced composite sketches of what both twins might look like at age 17. Investigators continued to confront Trish about her constantly changing stories and press her to reveal Ivon and Inisha's whereabouts. Trish finally admitted that several years earlier, when the twins were around 5 years old, she met a man named Mike at a bar in Homestead, another borough in Allegheny County. Mike introduced Trish to a woman she knew only as Barbara, and after bringing Barbara to her home several times in order to meet Ivon and Inisha, Trish arranged to sell the twins to her for $2,000. Well, when detectives informed Trish that selling her own children was a criminal offense, she immediately recanted her story and now said that she flat out didn't know where the twins were. On August the 9th, Trish was arrested and charged with a number of offenses, including 2 counts of endangering the welfare of a child, 2 counts of concealing the whereabouts of a child, 1 count of obstruction of justice in a child abuse case, and 1 count of unsworn falsification. Her bond was set at $5,000, and after friends and relatives paid 10% of that amount by posting $500 in cash, Trish was released. Just over 1 week later, on August the 17th, the Pittsburgh-based television station, WTAE, aired a segment about this story on their Action 4 news program, which included a sit-down interview Trish had requested with one of the reporters, Kelly Brennan. Trish stated, quote, "I didn't sell my kids and they're not missing," and provided an all-new story about what happened to Ivon and Inisha. Trish now claimed that 10 years earlier, she was a struggling single mother who could not care for all of her children, so a family friend named Cheryl Willis agreed to help out by taking custody of the twins. Willis then took them to North Carolina, but around the time they turned 13, they relocated to Georgia. When asked why she never shared this story with law enforcement, Trish claimed that she had a quote-unquote learning disability and was left confused by a lot of the questions they were asking. The segment also featured comments from Trish's son, Daytwan Jr., who is now 18 years old, and claimed that he had been speaking with Ivon on social media over the past week. He even said that Ivon had recently traveled to Pittsburgh and was now on a bus back to Georgia, though he would soon contact the Penn Hills Police Department. Kelly Brennan reported that she was given a phone number to contact Ivon, but whenever she tried it, her calls only went to voicemail. The Penn Hills PD also confirmed that they were contacted by someone from that same phone number who was claiming to be Ivon, but had not yet verified his identity. Well, the day after this news segment aired, things took an even more bizarre turn when the Penn Hills Police Department's Facebook page received a private message from a Facebook account under the name Ivon D. Fowler. The writer of the message claimed that he was Ivon and provided a new cell phone number to contact him. When one of the detectives called this number, it went straight to voicemail, so he decided to send a text instead. It wasn't long before the detective received a text back from someone identifying themselves as Ivon Fowler, who confirmed that both he and his sister were alive and currently living in Atlanta. However, when police performed a trace of this number, they discovered that it was originating from a cell phone at Trish's residence on Bryant Street. They subsequently traveled to the house with a search warrant, and when they arrived, they caught Daytwan Jr. attempting to escape, and he had the cell phone in his possession. Daytwan Jr. admitted that he had sent the text and the Facebook message and impersonated Ivon during the brief phone conversation with police, but said that he only did so in order to stop them from bothering his mother with questions about the twins. Regardless, Daytwan Jr. was arrested and charged with a number of offenses, including intimidation, retaliation, or obstruction in child abuse cases, criminal conspiracy, obstructing administration of law or other government function, and giving false information to law enforcement. Unlike his mother, Daytwan Jr. was unable to post the necessary bond for his release, so he remained in the Allegheny County Jail for the next several months. And not surprisingly, investigators were unable to find any evidence to substantiate Trish's new story about giving the twins to a woman named Cheryl Willis and could not confirm she actually existed. In late October of 2016, a preliminary hearing was held in order to determine whether Trish would stand trial on her various charges. At one point, Allegheny County Police Detective Michael Kuma was called upon to testify, and he expressed his personal belief that Ivon and Inisha were now dead. Kuma claimed that when he interviewed Daytwan Jr. about the missing twins, he recalled an incident from many years earlier where he went to bed while Ivon was feeling quote-unquote sick. When Daytwan Jr. woke up the following morning, Ivon was gone. Daytwan Jr. said that a similar thing happened with Inisha at a later date after the family moved to a new residence. Once again, Daytwan Jr. saw Inisha right before he went to bed one night, but by the time he woke up the next morning, she was gone. Trish's oldest daughter, Aisha, also had a similar recollection of Ivon and Inisha disappearing at different times. Aisha said that she went to school one day, but when she returned home, Inisha was gone without explanation. The twins' paternal grandmother, Charlene Miller, attended the hearing and spoke with Trish, who told her she didn't remember where the twins were and that their names had been changed. Charlene said that when she brought up the possibility of searching for the twins' remains, Trish started shaking before she jumped out of her seat and refused to talk with Charlene anymore. At the end of the hearing, a district judge ruled that Trish would stand trial on all of her charges. By this point, Ivon and Inisha had passed what should have been their 18th birthdays, so CYF filed a motion to argue that since the twins were now legal adults and technically no longer children, they should not be subject to CYF's protection. A hearing was held in Allegheny County Family Court in which a judge ruled that CYF could close their file on the twins, so their disappearances would now only be investigated by law enforcement. On December the 29th, the Allegheny County Police Department used cadaver dogs to perform a search of a house on Reeve Street in the borough of North Braddock. Trish and her children had previously resided at this residence, but the search turned up nothing. While following Trish's arrest, the Pennsylvania Office of State Inspector General opened up a new welfare claims investigation and started checking an electronic state database. The scanned records in this database only dated back to July of 2011, but they showed that ever since then, Trish had collected a number of benefits in which she listed Ivon and Inisha as dependents on the applications. These included the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Program, and various medical benefits, and Trish wound up receiving around $57,000 over the course of 5 years. In fact, Ivon and Inisha would still be listed as dependents on these applications, even though they were not listed as prospective tenants on Trish's housing applications to the various rental properties where she lived. So in January of 2017, Trish was charged with some additional felony counts, including theft by deception and making false statements in order to obtain public assistance. While this was going on, Trish failed to appear in court for a formal arraignment on her original charges, so a warrant was issued for her arrest. She was taken into custody 2 days later while hiding out at the residence of her current boyfriend. Her original bond was revoked, and she would remain in the Allegheny County Jail on a new $10,000 bond. In March, The court agreed to grant Daytwan Jr.'s release from jail on a non-monetary bond, though he was instructed to have no contact with his mother. Well, on May the 18th, before Trish could stand trial, Allegheny County Common Pleas Judge Thomas Flaherty issued a 13-page opinion in which he dismissed most of the charges against Trish. Judge Flaherty did not believe it was proven that Trish had endangered the twins or concealed their whereabouts, and felt that the charge of obstruction of justice in a child abuse case should be dropped, since there was no evidence that any abuse had taken place. However, since Trish had still provided misleading statements to the authorities, the judge did not drop the unsworn falsification charge, though he agreed to release Trish from jail on a non-monetary bond. On July the 17th, after a plea agreement was negotiated, Trish pled guilty to one count of unsworn falsification, as well as additional theft and fraud charges in relation to the public assistance she had obtained while the twins were missing. As an additional term of the plea agreement, all charges against Daytwan Jr. for impersonating Ivon would be dropped. Trish wound up receiving a sentence of 4 years probation and was ordered to pay $57,000 in restitution. Trish has always continued to maintain that the twins were not harmed and are still alive somewhere, but there have been no new developments in the investigation since the charges against her were dropped. Officially, Ivon and Inisha Fowler have not been confirmed to be alive for 2 decades, but their ultimate fate continues to remain an unsolved mystery. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. But before we continue, I'd like to take a few moments to tell our listeners about a true crime podcast that, as a fan of The Trail Went Cold, I think you'll enjoy. It's called Criminology. Criminology debuted in 2017, and thus far, hosts Mike Ferguson and Mike Morford have published over 250 episodes that are available to binge on right now. They've covered everything from shocking murder cases to perplexing missing persons cases. Some of the cases they cover are well-known ones like the Boston Strangler, the Delphi murders, or Son of Sam. But other cases are truly bizarre ones you may not have heard of, like the Pocatello babysitter murders, the Amana Hatchet murders, or the puzzling missing persons case of Keith Mann. The two mics dive into both solved and unsolved cases and tackle not only new cases that are currently making headlines, but long-forgotten cases as well, and you can even catch full seasons focusing on the Zodiac Killer, the Golden State Killer, and Ted Bundy. So check out Criminology Podcast for yourself. Criminology is available everywhere you listen to podcasts, and new episodes drop every Saturday night. Subscribe to Criminology right now so you don't miss a single episode. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of this episode. Now, during the intro, I made comparisons between this story and the disappearance of Danette and Jeanette Millbrook, since they both involved a pair of twins who were missing for years before a proper investigation was performed. But while the delay in the Millbrook case was the result of police indifference, law enforcement was not even aware that Ivon and Inisha Fowler were missing until over a decade after the fact, and it seems likely that their mother knows exactly what happened. I have to say, if there's one type of missing persons case that really bothers me, it's those in which a child's disappearance is not noticed for several years, and it becomes apparent that their guardian was involved and attempted to conceal the disappearance as long as they could. For some other examples of this, just do a Google search on such names as Relia Wilson, Garnell Moore, Adam Herman, and Christina Richard. In many of these cases, the victim hailed from a family that was under the watch of Child Protective Services, but they failed to notice that this child was missing. Another common thread in a number of these stories is that the victim's guardian would commit fraud and continue collecting benefits on these children for long periods of time after they went missing. Hell, this sort of situation can also occur with elderly individuals. Back in episode number 184 of The Trail Went Cold, I covered the disappearance of a senior citizen named Walter Dunson, where his son kept cashing his Social Security checks for 18 years after he was last confirmed to be alive. While it's never been conclusively proven that Trish Fowler harmed Ivon and Inisha, we do know that she was still listing their names on her applications for benefits when they were no longer living with her, so there was definitely fraud involved. In many of these delayed missing persons cases, there are no up-to-date photographs available for the victims by the time their disappearances receive attention from law enforcement and the media. But the fact that Ivon and Inisha's disappearances were not noticed until 2016, and the only available photograph of them was taken 17 years earlier when they were just infants, is incredibly sad. So this is a mystery in which no other solution makes sense other than Trish Fowler being responsible for the twins' disappearances. But we still don't know what exactly Trish did to them, and there are a lot of unanswered questions about what happened. If you search online discussions about this case, the majority consensus seems to be that Trish is an evil monster who murdered Ivon and Inisha, and I have to admit that when I first became familiar with this story, I initially thought the same thing. However, on January the 1st, 2017, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette published a very extensive and in-depth article about the twins' disappearances, and after reading it, I felt that this case wasn't quite as cut and dried as it first appeared. Don't get me wrong, I still believe that Trish knows exactly what happened, and there's no way she's completely innocent in this whole affair, but this article just made me feel more perplexed about the whole situation. A pair of twins going missing together is an unusual enough situation, but what further complicates this story is that the evidence suggests that Ivon and Inisha may have disappeared at completely separate times. While detectives who have worked on this case believe that the twins are no longer alive, I guess the optimist in me hopes that Trish may have sold or given them away, and they are now both living out there somewhere under false identities, completely unaware that they are missing persons. And if Ivon and Inisha were given away to different individuals at different times, then it would be harder to put two and two together. In many of those other cases I mentioned about children who were not reported missing for years, allegations of abuse would come out against their guardian, which made it easy to imagine a scenario in which the child was killed in a fit of rage and the guardian disposed of their body. I was thinking that a similar situation may have occurred with the twins, but surprisingly, even though she has raised no less than 9 children in her lifetime, I have never seen any allegations of abuse against Trish. Yes, we did have one incident where Ivon suffered some horrible 2nd and 3rd degree burns when he was only 2 years old, but Trish always maintained that this occurred because his older brother, Daytwan Jr., inadvertently hit the sour spigot and caused Ivon to be sprayed with hot water. It is problematic that Trish did not call for medical attention until the following day, but let's not forget that CYF performed an investigation and seemed to believe that Ivon's burns were the result of an accident, which is why he was returned to Trish's custody. Now, I will add the disclaimer that since CYF investigations are confidential, they will often withhold many details from the public, so we may not know the full story of what did or did not take place in Trish's home. And I'm definitely not going to try and paint Trish as Mother of the Year, because the reason this story wound up in the spotlight to begin with is because she was not providing proper medical care for some of her other children, so CYF had them removed from her home. But it must be said that from what I can tell, none of Trish's kids have openly accused her of any abuse towards them or Ivon or Inisha. While Trish received numerous visits from CYF over the years, they were mostly due to truancy issues from her children not attending school. And even though there were occasions where Trish was evicted from rental properties due to non-payment, prior to 2016, she was never arrested or jailed for any crimes. Of course, if Trish was violent and abusive, you can assume that her other children have never spoken out because they're afraid of her. But it's worth mentioning that by the time the twins' disappearance were noticed, Trish's 2 oldest daughters, Aisha and Raven, were 25 and 20 years old respectively, and had already moved out on their own, and were both described as being responsible young women who held down jobs. Aisha also had a child of her own, and she was allowed to take care of Trish's 2 younger daughters, Asia and Akira, while CYF was performing their investigation. And when Trish started facing legal troubles and was evicted from her residence in Penn Hills, Aisha allowed her mother to stay with her. It was also reported that when Trish appeared in court to face her charges, Asia and Akira showed up to support her and seemed to be in good spirits. All that being said, I find it very odd that no one from that household can offer any insight into what actually happened to the twins. It appears the other children have said that the twins were simply there one moment and gone the next, and the cover story that Trish provided for years is that they were being taken care of by friends or relatives in another state. But what makes this situation even more unusual is that Ivon and Inisha may not have even disappeared together. The account provided by Daytwan Jr. is that when he last saw Ivon, he appeared to be sick, and when Daytwan Jr. went to sleep and woke up the next morning, Ivon was gone. And apparently, the same situation repeated itself with Inisha at a later time. This seems to be corroborated by the twins' father, Daytwan Sr., as he last recalled seeing Ivon shortly after he was discharged from the hospital and was covered in bandages from the burns. By his own admission, Daytwan Sr. is not good at remembering dates, but he was certain that he saw Inisha as late as the summer of 2001, which would have been several months after he last saw Ivon. You might be wondering why Daytwan Sr. was not more alarmed about two of his children disappearing without explanation, but he had a total of 10 children with 2 different women and was frequently in and out of jail, so I'm sure he was not the most attentive father and just took Trish's word for it that the twins were being cared for by someone else. Considering that he has spent time in prison for murder, I guess we have to explore the possibility that Daytwan Sr. may have harmed Ivon or Inisha, and Trish helped him cover the whole thing up. But in spite of his issues, I've never seen anything to indicate that Daytwan Sr. was violent towards his children, and I don't believe the authorities consider him to be a potential suspect. Trish was described as a fairly reclusive person who didn't drive or have a job and lived off state assistance. She also did not have any real hobbies or close friends and seemed to be completely devoted to her family. Even though 2 of his children went missing under her watch, Daytwan Sr. still expressed his belief that Trish was a good mother, and the various landlords who rented properties to her described her as a pleasant person. So what could have paved the way for the twins' disappearance? Another unusual aspect of this story is that Ivon and Inisha were technically only the 4th and 5th of Trish's 9 children, as she would go on to have 2 more sons and 2 more daughters with Daytwan Sr. after the twins were born. In fact, if you look at the timeline, their youngest son and youngest daughter were likely born after Ivon and Inisha went missing. So if Trish wanted to get rid of the twins because they were too much of a burden, it's odd that she would go on to have more children. You have to remember that Trish's 2 youngest sons had medical issues which provided serious challenges, as one of them had autism, while the other had muscular dystrophy and was confined to a wheelchair. While Trish was definitely neglectful about providing these 2 boys with the necessary medical treatment, she was still taking care of them, so what was it about Ivon and Inisha which may have compelled her to get rid of them? Well, obviously, since Ivon suffered serious burns on over 40% of his body, it's possible that this could have led to some medical issues. It's interesting that Daytwan Jr. described Ivon as being sick the last time he remembered seeing him. If Ivon developed some sort of infection from his burns and died while in his mother's care, Trish may have decided to cover the whole thing up and get rid of Ivon's body because she feared the rest of her children would be taken away from her. But if that's the case, then why get rid of Inisha? If the accounts are accurate, that Inisha was still around for months after Ivon went missing, what prompted her disappearance? Did she also suffer from some sort of medical neglect? Would Trish intentionally kill Inisha and dispose of her body just to fabricate a cover story about having given both of the twins away together? Well, in order to figure out what might have happened here, let's look at the timeline. Even though the only existing photo of the 2 twins was taken shortly after they were born, we know that Ivon and Inisha had to be alive for at least 2 years, since it is documented that Ivon was treated for his burns and discharged from the hospital on December the 13th, 2000. While there are hazy accounts from people who believe they saw the twins after that, this is the last concrete date we have in which they were absolutely confirmed to be alive. I guess the big complication is the note in the CYF case file from the social worker who had apparently seen Ivon and Inisha during a visit to Trish's residence on September the 11th, 2006. The twins would have been just under 7 years old at that time, and this caseworker later testified that Ivon and Inisha were being cared for by relatives in North Carolina, though I get the impression that the caseworker never officially confirmed that and just took Trish at her word. In spite of what they wrote in the file, it appears that the caseworker is no longer certain that they saw the twins in September of 2006 because they do not recall seeing any scarring on Ivon's body, which he should have had from the burning incident 6 years earlier. But this only makes me more confused because why would the caseworker write that the twins have been seen? Was this just an error? Or did Trish somehow find an altogether different set of twins to impersonate Ivon and Inisha during the visit? As absurd as that scenario sounds, it actually reminds me of a scene from the 1978 movie Blue Collar, where Richard Pryor's character lies about how many children he has on his tax returns, so he brings some neighborhood kids into his residence to impersonate his children when an agent from the IRS shows up. I have no idea what actually happened, but I am inclined to believe that the caseworker was mistaken because Trish did not list Ivon and Inisha as prospective tenants on her application to move into that particular residence, and the landlord did not recall seeing any twins the entire time she was living there. So I think that the twins were probably 2 or 3 years old at the most when they originally went missing. When Judge Thomas Flaherty issued his legal opinion, where he dismissed the charges against Trish in 2017, he directed a lot of criticism towards CYF and their inability to notice that the twins were missing for so many years. This seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of these cases, as child protective services like CYF are often overworked and understaffed and have a high turnover of employees. As a result, proper follow-up investigations are not performed to ensure the welfare of children living in troubled households, and we get situations like this, where a child's disappearance slips under the radar, and it takes years for anyone in authority to even notice they're missing. So even though I've been trying to give Trish a fair shake, and explore the possibility that she is not the violent, abusive monster everyone still seems to think she is, that does not mean she's an innocent victim, and regardless of whether Ivon and Inisha are dead or alive, I'm sure she does know the truth about what happened to them. She was caught in a number of different lies, kept giving contradictory stories about the twins' whereabouts, and she knowingly committed fraud by collecting benefits for them, even though they were no longer living with her at the time. And there's also the fact that Daytwan Jr. went to the trouble of impersonating Ivon during phone conversations, text messages, and Facebook communications with the police. Prior to this, Daytwan Jr. had no history of juvenile delinquency or trouble with the law, and I get the impression that he did this simply because his mother asked him to, even though Daytwan Jr. may legitimately have no idea what actually happened to the twins. Of course, it was an incredibly stupid and poorly thought out plan, because if you use a cell phone to send fake text to the police, you should know that they're going to be able to trace it. This was an obvious move of desperation, particularly since the texts were sent the day after Trish gave her interview on WTAE TV and claimed she gave the twins away to a woman named Cheryl Willis, who probably does not even exist. Since Trish apparently requested this interview, I think she may have felt she was going to use Daytwan Jr. to help outsmart the authorities, but the whole thing wound up backfiring in a huge way. However, even though there is ample evidence that Trish is lying about what happened to the twins, no evidence has ever surfaced to prove that she did something to them. This is why she only pled guilty to charges involving welfare fraud and making false statements to the police, and managed to get off with a sentence of probation. Hell, Judge Flaherty would not even allow her to be charged with obstruction of justice in a child abuse case because there was no actual evidence to prove that child abuse took place. Yes, it might seem outrageous that Trish avoided prison time and has been walking free these past several years, but we still can't prove without a shadow of a doubt that Ivon and Inisha are dead. I am inclined to believe that the twins are no longer with us, but if Trish did sell or give them away, they still would have been young enough to have no memory of their lives with her, so they could still be out there somewhere, living under false identities. Now, as you recall, one of the stories Trish shared with police was that she sold Ivon and Inisha to a woman named Barbara for $2,000, but quickly recanted her story once she was told that selling her own children was illegal. Since no evidence was ever found to corroborate this account, it's probably just as bogus as Trish's other stories, But what kind of a woman would voluntarily tell the police that she did this to her children? This suggests to me that she was either completely oblivious, or the actual truth about what happened to the twins is a lot worse. But hypothetically, what if there was some truth to this particular story? It sounds like Trish's relationship with Daytwan Sr. could best be described as on again, off again, and he didn't play that much of a role in his children's lives, so for the most part, she pretty much had to raise them as a single mother. So what if Trish finally reached the point where she decided there were too many kids for her to handle, and she wanted to get rid of some of them? If she sold Ivon and Inisha, I'm sure it would have raised some eyebrows if she came into a sudden influx of money, but then again, if she only got $2,000 for them, that probably wouldn't have been very noticeable. Of course, according to others who knew them, Ivon and Inisha seemed to go missing at completely separate times, so could Trish have arranged to sell them or give them away to two separate people? Well, if that is what happened, then this might explain why no one has ever been able to track them down. If Ivon and Inisha are still alive and had spent the past 2 decades living together as twins, that may have raised a few eyebrows, but if they'd been living separately, it would be harder to put 2 and 2 together. All that being said, Ivon did have scarring on 40% of his body, which is a very distinct feature, and thus far, it does not sound like the authorities have found any adult-age males with scarring like that who are potential candidates to be Ivon. In fact, since there do not appear to have been any major developments in the investigation these past 6 years, I hope that the authorities have not hit a dead end. If Ivon and Inisha are still alive, they would currently be 24 years old, and their identities could be confirmed with DNA testing, so I'll try to remain optimistic. If the twins are deceased, then it's important to keep their memories alive, since all we have left of them is one photograph from when they were infants. Even if Ivon and Inisha's family did not care for them that much, they need to know that there are a number of people out there who do care and want a conclusive resolution. So if you happen to have any information on the disappearances of Ivon and Inisha Fowler, please contact the Penn Hills Police Department at 412-798-2035. That's 412-798-2035. Anyway, another special thanks to Kim Fritz for narrating the opening of this week's episode. If you've already entered our listener voiceover contest before, you are automatically eligible for our next random drawing, so you don't have to do anything. But if you would like to enter and haven't already done so, all you have to do is send me an email under the subject line Trail Went Cold Contest, naming the one unsolved cold case you would most like to see featured on this podcast. Once again, send me an email under the subject line Trail Went Cold Contest to robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Now the reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. This past month, I released an episode about the 1910 disappearance of Conradina Olson, which was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, and explored the possibility that she was a Jane Doe who was allegedly murdered next to some railroad tracks and buried in an unmarked grave. I've also dropped an exclusive bonus episode from my spin-off podcast, The Path Went Chilly, in which myself and my 2 co-hosts, Jules and Ashley, discuss yet another case from Unsolved Mysteries, the 1967 murder of Ralph Probst. And for our patrons in Tier 3, I've recorded another new audio commentary track, which can be played over a classic episode of Unsolved Mysteries. I also wanted to mention that this coming summer, The Trail Went Cold will be appearing at the True Crime Podcast Festival, which is taking place from August the 25th to the 27th at the Doubletree by Hilton Hotel in Austin, Texas. We've got a specialized promo code you can use in order to get a 15% discount on tickets to the event, so to order tickets, please visit their website at truecrimepodcastfestival.com and use our promo code TRAIL. Once again, that's truecrimepodcastfestival.com, and the promo code is TRAIL. I just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the ear music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Anyway, in just over a week from now, I'll be overseas in London attending CrimeCon UK, and I hope to see some of you folks there. And per tradition, whenever I attend one of these podcasting events, I like to cover a cold case from the event's host city, so next week, I will be exploring an unsolved mystery from London. So until then, have yourselves a great week, and join us next Wednesday for our next brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.